The bell above the diner door jingled for the 100th time that morning, and she looked up with a tired but polite smile. Her name was Maggie Dawson, and she'd been on her feet since 6. The smell of fried bacon and burnt coffee clung to her uniform, and her sneakers made a faint squeak on the checkered floor as she moved between tables. To most people, she was invisible, just the girl who brought their pancakes and remembered how they liked their eggs. But Maggie saw everything. She saw the young couple who came in every Sunday, pretending not to argue. She saw the old man who never ordered more than 1 cup of coffee but always left a big tip. And she saw the people who looked through her, those who didn't even bother to read her name tag before snapping their fingers for more sugar. It wasn't that they were cruel, she told herself. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe they didn't know how much words could sting. Still, some days were harder than others. Some days, when the laughter at the corner booth got a little too loud, Maggie could feel it, that sharp little ache of being underestimated. Outside the diner windows, the town looked ordinary. A few small shops, a barber, a laundromat, and a gas station. Life moved slow there. People worked hard, talked about the weather, and rarely believed in dreams that went beyond what they could see. Maggie had learned that early. After her father passed away when she was 16, she dropped out of school to help her mother pay the bills. One job turned into another until she landed at the diner, Daisy's place, a spot that smelled of nostalgia and butter. She'd been there 5 years now. 5 long years of sure thing, hun, and can I get you anything else? To the world, Maggie was just a waitress. But when the lights of the diner went off and the last table was wiped clean, she became something else entirely. At home, a tiny room above the local thrift store, she'd sit by the window with a small notebook and a pencil worn down from use. She would draw. Dresses, shoes, handbags, things she'd never owned but loved to imagine. The sketches weren't perfect, but they made her feel alive. The moment her pencil touched paper, her world opened up. She often took inspiration from the people she served. The woman with the red scarf that always hung off her shoulder. The teenage girl who wore patched-up jeans but carried herself like she owned the world. Even the tired delivery drivers, their faded jackets, their rough edges, they all became part of her designs. Maggie didn't think of herself as an artist. She didn't even think she was special. Drawing was just something she did to breathe. But deep down, hidden beneath the quiet layers of her life, was a dream she hadn't said out loud in years. She wanted to be a designer, not for fame or money, but because she wanted to create beauty where people least expected it. She wanted to show that even ordinary things could shine. Every morning before work, Maggie would look at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Her brown hair was always tied back, her apron neatly ironed. "One day," she'd whisper. Just one day. Then she'd grab her notepad, stuff it into her bag, and head back to Daisy's. The diner had its regulars. There was Mr. Cole, who told the same joke about the weather every time it rained. There was little Tommy, who came in with his mom after school and always spilled his chocolate milk. And there was a group of office workers who came in every Friday and took the biggest booth. They called Maggie Coffee Girl instead of her name. She didn't mind, not out loud, at least. But sometimes when she was wiping down their table after they left, she'd imagine standing in front of them wearing one of her own designs, confident and proud, while they blinked in disbelief. The thought always made her smile. One day near closing time, the diner was almost empty except for a woman sitting by the window. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a navy blue coat and holding a small notepad. Maggie hadn't seen her before. She had kind eyes, the sort that noticed everything. "Coffee, ma'am?" Maggie asked. "Yes, please," the woman said with a soft smile, "and maybe just a slice of that cherry pie. It looks too good to resist." As Maggie poured her coffee, she noticed the woman glancing around, almost studying the room. "Busy day?" she asked, trying to make small talk. "They're all busy," Maggie replied with a faint laugh. "But that's life here." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "You must see all kinds of people." "Oh, I do," Maggie said. "And most of them don't see me." The woman looked up. "You mean they don't look at you, or they don't see who you are?" Maggie blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Maybe both." The woman smiled again as if she understood more than she said. "Well, I see someone with a lot on her mind." Maggie gave a small laugh. "Mostly just bills and burnt toast." After the woman left, Maggie noticed something on the counter, a few dollar bills and a napkin. On it, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "You have a creative soul. Don't let it get lost in routine." Her heart skipped. She turned the napkin over, half expecting a signature, but there was none. Still, it made her smile in a way she hadn't in weeks. That night, she pulled out her sketchbook and added a new design, a simple dress with a flowy skirt and a pattern that looked like cherry blossoms. She wrote under it, "For the woman by the window." In the following days, the diner ran as usual. Maggie took orders, smiled through exhaustion, and listened to the same old stories. But something inside her had shifted. The napkin had reminded her that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her for more than her uniform. She started keeping her sketches in her apron pocket. Whenever she got a moment between tables, she'd add a line or shade to her drawings on the back of receipts or napkins. She began to see patterns everywhere. The swirl of cream in coffee, the folds of napkins, the shine of silverware. One evening, a group of teenagers came in, laughing and teasing. They were from the local high school, the same one she had dropped out of. She recognized one of them, a girl named Lila who used to be in her art class. "Hey Maggie," Lila called out with a grin. "Still working here? Thought you'd have left by now." Her friends laughed. Maggie felt her cheeks flush but forced a smile. "Still here," she said lightly. "Somebody's got to keep this place running." When they left, she tried to brush it off. But the words stuck. She wasn't ashamed of her job. She worked hard and it paid the rent, but sometimes it felt like the world had already decided what she was allowed to be. That night, she stared at her sketches longer than usual. She thought about the woman with the kind eyes, about the napkin message, about her younger self, the one who used to dream big before life got heavy. And then, for the first time, she made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let anyone's opinion define her anymore. She didn't know how or when, but she would find a way to chase her dream, even if it took years. When she finally went to bed, the sound of rain tapped gently on the window. The town outside slept, unaware that something inside her had quietly awakened. Tomorrow would look the same diner, the same customers, the same routine, but Maggie knew she'd see it differently. Because deep inside, beneath the apron and the tired smile, a dream was stirring again, and this time, she wouldn't let it fade. The diner was busier than usual that morning. A small bus of tourists had stopped by, filling nearly every table. The noise of chatter, clinking spoons, and sizzling bacon filled the air. Maggie moved quickly from one booth to another, balancing plates on her arm like it was second nature. Despite the rush, she was smiling more these days. Ever since that mysterious woman left the napkin with the kind words, something inside her had changed. She couldn't explain it, but it was like a small spark had been lit. After the tourists left, the diner went quiet again. The afternoon sunlight poured through the window, painting golden lines on the floor. Maggie took a seat at the counter to rest her feet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded napkin covered in pencil lines. It was her latest sketch, a soft summer dress with lace details on the sleeves. She had drawn it the night before while listening to the rain. "You always draw in something," said Brenda, the cook, wiping her hands on her apron. Maggie smiled shyly. "It helps me relax." "You're pretty good at it," Brenda said, leaning closer. "You ever think about doing something with it?" Maggie hesitated. "Sometimes. But people like me don't really get chances like that." Brenda gave her a look. "That's what folks say before they surprise everybody." Maggie laughed softly but didn't answer. She didn't want to sound foolish. She'd heard too many people in town laugh at anyone who dreamed big. Later that day, while cleaning a booth near the window, Maggie noticed a familiar figure walk in. It was the same woman from a few weeks ago, the one who left the napkin. She was wearing a cream-colored coat and carried a small leather purse. "Well, look who's back," Maggie said with a smile. The woman grinned. "I was hoping you'd be here. That pie last time was too good to forget." Maggie poured her a coffee and brought the cherry pie again. As the woman sipped, she looked at Maggie closely. "You remind me of someone I used to know," she said softly. "She was a dreamer too." Maggie chuckled nervously. "Dreaming doesn't pay the rent." "Maybe not," the woman said, "but it makes life worth living." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small card. "My name's Evelyn. I used to work in the fashion industry, mostly buying for stores. I see things, details others miss." Maggie froze. Fashion. The word itself made her heart skip. I noticed your sketches last time, Evelyn continued. You were doodling on a napkin. Do you do that often? Every day, Maggie said before she could stop herself. It's kind of my secret hobby. May I see them? Evelyn asked gently. Maggie hesitated. Showing her drawings to a stranger felt like exposing a part of her soul, but something in Evelyn's eyes, warm, genuine, curious, and gave her courage. She took out her small notebook from her apron pocket and handed it over. Evelyn flipped through the pages slowly, her expression thoughtful. She didn't say much, just nodded from time to time. When she finished, she placed the notebook down and smiled. These are lovely. You have an eye for shape and texture. You think in patterns, not just lines, Maggie blinked. You really think so? I know so, Evelyn said firmly. You should apply for the local design scholarship. The deadline's in 2 weeks. It's for self-taught designers. I can give you the link. Maggie laughed softly, shaking her head. A scholarship for me? I don't even have a diploma. Evelyn smiled knowingly. Talent doesn't need a diploma. It needs courage. Those words stuck in Maggie's mind long after Evelyn left. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at her little desk staring at her sketches. The idea of applying for something so big scared her. But the thought of not trying scared her even more. The next day, she borrowed the diner's old computer during her break and found the scholarship website. It asked for photos of original designs, a short essay about her passion, and a digital portfolio. Her hands trembled as she read. She didn't even own a proper camera, let alone a sewing machine. Still, when she got home that evening, she began to work. She pulled out a bag of old clothes from the thrift store, things she'd saved for fabric. She stayed up all night cutting, stitching by hand and reshaping what she had. The tiny room turned into a creative mess, scraps of fabric everywhere, needles stuck into pillows, coffee cups stacked near the window. By dawn, she had 3 handmade outfits, one from an old tablecloth, another from a torn denim jacket, and the third from her old diner uniform. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion and excitement. Maggie took pictures using her phone, typed out her story, and uploaded her sketches. When she finally hit submit, she sat back in her chair, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know what would happen, but for the first time she felt brave. Word got around the diner faster than she expected. Someone must have overheard her talking to Brenda because soon half the town knew. Some were supportive, but many weren't. You think you'll actually win that thing? Said one customer, half joking but half mean. Maggie smiled politely. You never know until you try, another regular chuckled. We'll still keep your table warm when you come back from the big city. The laughter that followed stung more than she showed. When she went into the back room, she stood still for a moment, letting the noise fade. She wanted to be proud of herself, but it was hard when everyone seemed to see her dream as a joke. A week later, the diner phone rang during her shift. Brenda called her over. It's for you, kid. Maggie's heart raced. Maybe it was about the scholarship. Maybe. But when she picked up, the voice on the other end was polite but distant. We regret to inform you. Her knees felt weak. She hung up quietly, whispering, Thank you. That night she went straight home, crawled into bed, and didn't open her sketchbook. For the first time in months, she felt foolish again. The old doubts crept back, the ones she thought she had left behind. Maybe the town had been right all along. Maybe she wasn't meant for more. The next day, she moved through work like a shadow. Brenda noticed but didn't push. Around closing time, Maggie heard the door chime. Evelyn walked in. I had a feeling I'd find you here, she said softly. Maggie tried to smile but couldn't. They said no. Evelyn nodded. I'm sorry, dear, but that's not the end. It's just one door that didn't open. I really thought, Maggie began, but her voice broke. I really thought maybe I could do it. Evelyn put a hand on her shoulder. You can do it. You don't need their approval to prove that. Keep creating. Keep showing up. She handed Maggie a small folder. Inside were pages of notes, websites, tutorials, online forums, small contests. These are for people who love to learn and create. I used to mentor young designers. I'd like to help you if you'll let me. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever believed in her like that before. That night, instead of giving up, she opened her notebook again. She watched videos online, learned about fabrics, colors, and stitching. She joined a forum where people shared their designs and stories. Slowly, she started to rebuild her confidence. Her tiny room turned into a workshop once more. Each new design told a story, of struggle, of hope, of small victories. She learned to take better pictures to showcase her work online. One evening, after uploading a few designs, she went to bed early. The next morning, she woke up to find her notifications full. Dozens of people had liked her post. A few even commented, asking if she sold her dresses. Her heart raced. She had never imagined strangers would care. When she walked into the diner that day, she felt lighter. The laughter and whispers didn't sting anymore. She realized something powerful. People could sneer all they wanted, but they couldn't take away her passion. As the sun set that evening, she sat by the window sketching again. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. Talent needs courage. For the first time, Maggie believed it. She didn't win the scholarship, but she won something bigger. The belief that she didn't need permission to dream. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The weeks after the rejection went by slowly. Maggie returned to her routine at the diner, but everything felt heavier. The same bell over the door rang, the same coffee brewed, the same faces filled the booths, yet she felt different. Something in her heart had cracked, though she didn't let anyone see it. Every time she looked at her sketches, she remembered that phone call, the polite voice saying she wasn't chosen. It echoed in her mind like a whisper that wouldn't leave. She told herself to stop caring, but she couldn't. Still, Evelyn kept visiting. Every few days, she'd come in for coffee and pie, sitting in the same booth by the window. She never pushed, never scolded. She'd just talk to Maggie like an old friend, about colors, textures, or the way inspiration can show up in unexpected places. One afternoon, Evelyn brought her a gift, a small second-hand sewing machine. It was a little scratched and old-fashioned, but it worked perfectly. "I can't take this," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "Yes, you can," Evelyn insisted gently. "Consider it an investment, not in money, but in belief." Maggie didn't know what to say. She wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. She hugged Evelyn tightly and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Maggie set the sewing machine on her tiny table. She ran her fingers over it like it was made of gold. Then she started working. She had no plan, just a box of scraps, some thread, and a heart full of emotion. The hum of the machine filled her room long after midnight. Each stitch felt like healing. She was sewing her pain, her hope, her quiet determination into every piece. She began creating clothes out of discarded fabrics from the thrift store. A dress from old curtains, a jacket from a pair of torn jeans, a bag made from leftover diner aprons. She took pictures of her work and posted them online, one design at a time. At first, only a few people noticed. But slowly, her small posts began to spread. A woman commented, "This is beautiful. You have real talent." Another wrote, "I'd love to wear something like this." Every kind word lifted her spirit a little higher. Then one evening, she received a message from a small online magazine that featured amateur artists. They wanted to include her in their hidden talents column. Maggie read the message twice to make sure it was real. When the article came out, it wasn't huge, just a small piece with a few of her photos. But to her, it felt like winning a medal. People in town began to notice. Some smiled kindly, telling her how proud they were. Others, however, rolled their eyes. "She got lucky," one woman muttered at the counter. "Don't think she's some big shot now." Maggie heard it but didn't respond. It still hurt, but she was learning not to let it stop her. Evelyn encouraged her to enter another contest, this time a national design challenge for up-and-coming creators. The prize was a trip to Los Angeles to showcase designs at a young talent exhibition. When Maggie read about it, she felt that old fear creeping back. "I can't compete with real designers," she said. "Why not?" Evelyn asked. "You're a real designer too. You just don't have the title yet." Those words lit something in her again. That night, she decided to enter. The theme of the contest was transformation. Maggie thought about it for hours. Then it came to her. She would design something from her own story. Something that showed change, struggle, and beauty in unexpected places. She pulled out her old diner uniforms. The blue cotton fabric was worn thin, the seams faded, the logo slightly torn. To most people, it was just a piece of work clothing. But to Maggie, it was her history, the part of her that people overlooked. For 3 weeks, she worked after every shift. Her fingers ached, her back hurt, but she didn't stop. She combined the uniforms with pieces of lace, ribbons, and bits of fabric she'd saved. The result was a beautiful, flowing dress that still carried traces of her past. Small patches, a hint of the diner's blue, and tiny embroidered coffee cups hidden in the design. When she finished, she stood back and stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't just a dress. It was her story, stitched together with courage. She took careful photos and submitted them with her entry. Then came the waiting. Every day she checked her phone after work, half hoping, half dreading an email. Days turned into weeks. She tried to stay calm, but her heart raced every time her phone buzzed. Finally, one afternoon, while she was wiping a table, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She almost ignored it, thinking it was spam. But then she saw the subject line, "Congratulations." Her hands trembled. She opened the message slowly. "You have been selected as one of the finalists in the National Design Challenge. Please confirm your attendance at the showcase event in Los Angeles." She dropped the rag she was holding and covered her mouth in shock. Brenda looked up from behind the counter. "You okay, kid?" Maggie laughed and cried at the same time. I think I just made it." Evelyn came by that evening, and when Maggie told her, they both hugged tightly. "I told you," Evelyn said proudly. "Talent always finds its way." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Maggie had never been on a plane before. She borrowed a small suitcase from a friend, packed her best clothes, and carefully folded her design inside layers of tissue paper. When the day finally came, she boarded the plane with her heart pounding. The clouds outside looked like soft blankets, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly above everything that once held her down. Los Angeles was overwhelming. Tall buildings, bright lights, and people who walked with purpose. The event was held in a large hall filled with colorful designs from around the country. Maggie felt small, surrounded by professionals in fancy outfits, but Evelyn's words echoed in her head. "You belong here too." She took a deep breath and set up her display. Her dress stood proudly on a mannequin under a small spotlight. At first, a few people walked by without noticing. Then one woman stopped. Then another. Soon a small crowd gathered. "This is made from work uniforms?" someone asked in surprise. "Yes," Maggie said, her voice steady. "It's about transformation, turning something ordinary into something beautiful." A few people took pictures. Someone from a fashion blog asked for an interview. By the end of the evening, she was glowing. When the judges announced the winners, Maggie didn't expect to hear her name. She was already proud just to be there. But then, over the microphone, the announcer said, "And our People's Choice Award goes to Maggie Dawson for her design, Second Chances." The crowd clapped, cameras flashed, and for a moment she just stood there frozen. When she finally walked up to accept her award, she could barely hold back tears. As she spoke into the microphone, her voice trembled, but stayed true. "This dress was made from the uniforms I wore every day at my job as a waitress. People used to look right through me, but this is proof that there's beauty in every story, no matter how small it seems." The audience cheered, and Maggie smiled, not out of pride, but out of deep relief. She had done it. That night, when she returned to her small hotel room, she looked out at the city lights. She thought about the diner, about Brenda, about Evelyn, and even about the people who once laughed at her. She realized something important. Success didn't mean she was better than anyone else. It meant she had finally stopped doubting herself. The next morning, she got on the plane home with her award wrapped in her bag. When she landed, she went straight to the diner. Brenda hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "I knew you had it in you, kid," she said. Even some of the regulars congratulated her, awkwardly but sincerely. For the first time, the sneers were gone. Later that night, when the diner closed, Maggie sat at the counter with her sketchbook. She opened a fresh page and began to draw. She wasn't sketching for approval anymore. She was creating because it was who she was. She had learned something powerful. Dreams may bend, they may break for a while, but they never die if you keep believing. And as the hum of the diner faded into the quiet of the night, Maggie smiled to herself. The road ahead was still long, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had found her place, not in the spotlight, but in her own skin. The diner looked the same as it always had, but something inside Maggie had changed completely. She was no longer the quiet waitress who doubted herself every time someone laughed. She still worked hard, still wore her apron, still smiled through long shifts. But now there was a spark in her that nobody could dim. After her big win in Los Angeles, her photo had been printed in the local paper. The headline read, "Local Waitress Wins National Design Award." When she first saw it, she couldn't believe it. She cut out the article and taped it to her wall. It wasn't about pride, it was about proof. Proof that believing in yourself could change everything. People in town began to treat her differently. Some offered kind words, others asked for advice or small favors. A few even tried to act like they had supported her all along. Maggie didn't hold grudges. She smiled, said thank you, and kept her focus on what mattered, her work. Still, life didn't turn into a fairy tale overnight. Bills still came. Rent still needed to be paid. The diner still needed her. But she had a plan now. Evelyn helped her connect with a few people from the fashion event, photographers, small business owners, and even a boutique owner who wanted to showcase her designs. It was all happening faster than she could process, but Maggie handled it the same way she'd always handled life, one step at a time. Late one evening, she sat in her room surrounded by fabric. The little sewing machine hummed quietly as she worked on a new piece. It was another design made from reused material, an idea she loved because it reflected who she was. She believed every thread, no matter how worn, could become something beautiful again, but not everyone shared her excitement. Some of the townsfolk whispered that she was getting too big for her boots. Others said she'd forget where she came from. Maggie heard their words, and though they stung, she reminded herself that people often mock what they don't understand. One Friday morning, the diner was buzzing with talk. Someone had seen her interview online, a short video clip from the fashion show where she spoke about her journey. The video had been shared hundreds of times. Customers came in with smiles telling her how proud they were. Then there were a few who just smirked. One of them, a man who always sat at the counter, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Guess waitressing wasn't good enough anymore, huh?" Maggie looked at him for a moment, then smiled gently. "Waitressing is what made me who I am," she said. "It taught me to work hard even when nobody's watching." The man didn't respond. He looked away, embarrassed. Brenda, who had been listening, leaned over and whispered, "That's my girl." That night, Maggie stayed late at the diner. After cleaning up, she sat at one of the booths staring at the empty tables. The silence felt peaceful. She thought about everything, her struggles, her failures, and the people who doubted her. Then she thought about Evelyn, about how one kind stranger had changed her life just by believing in her. She promised herself she would do the same for someone else one day. As weeks passed, her online following grew. People from all over sent her messages, telling her how her story inspired them. Some were young designers, others were single parents or workers who felt stuck in their routines. They all said the same thing, that Maggie's story gave them hope. It was strange for her at first. She wasn't used to being seen as a role model, but she took it seriously. She answered messages, shared small tips, and even started making short videos showing how to create new clothes from old fabric. She filmed them in her small room using her phone, with her sewing machine buzzing in the background and her cat walking across the table now and then. The videos weren't fancy, but people loved them. They felt real. Soon her page was full of comments like, "You're proof that dreams can start anywhere, and you make me believe in myself again." One morning, she received an email from a large eco-friendly fashion company. They had seen her designs and wanted to collaborate on a small collection. Maggie read the email 3 times before she believed it was real. She screamed out loud, startling Brenda, who was carrying a tray of plates. "Everything okay?" Brenda laughed. "I think I just got the biggest opportunity of my life," Maggie said, her eyes wide. She called Evelyn right away. "They want to work with me," she said, almost breathless. Evelyn laughed softly on the other end. "Of course they do. You've earned it." The company invited Maggie to their studio to discuss ideas. They were inspired by her Second Chances dress, the one made from diner uniforms, and wanted her to design a full collection based on the same theme. When she arrived at the studio, she felt nervous again. Everyone looked polished and confident, moving fast, speaking in terms she barely understood. But instead of shrinking back, she stood tall. When it was her turn to speak, she told them her story, about the diner, the uniforms, the long nights sewing by hand. She spoke with honesty, her voice calm but strong. By the end, the room was silent. Then one of the executives smiled. "That's exactly the kind of story fashion needs," he said. The collaboration went ahead, and Maggie found herself working with professional tailors and designers for the first time. She learned everything she could: how to scale designs, choose fabrics, and market a collection. It was overwhelming at times, but she never forgot why she was there. The finished collection, named From the Ground Up, was launched online and quickly sold out. The response was incredible. People loved not just the clothes, but the message behind them. Every tag on her garments read, "Made with heart, not hype." The success opened even more doors. Magazines wanted interviews. Bloggers wrote about her. A few TV stations even reached out. But through it all, she stayed grounded. She still visited the diner on her days off, sometimes even helping Brenda behind the counter when things got busy. Customers were shocked to see her still wearing her apron, laughing and refilling coffee cups. One night, as she wiped down the counter, Evelyn walked in. "Still at it?" she teased. "Always," Maggie said, smiling. "This place keeps me real." Evelyn sat down and watched her for a while. "You've done something beautiful, you know. You didn't just change your life, you changed how people see others like you." Maggie paused, feeling tears sting her eyes. "I just wanted to prove that people like us deserve to be seen too." Evelyn nodded. "And now you're showing others how to believe in themselves." That night, after Evelyn left, Maggie sat by the window of the diner, looking out at the quiet street. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who drew on napkins and hid her dreams from the world. If only that girl could see her now. Still, Maggie didn't feel like she had reached the finish line. She felt like she was just getting started. She wanted to build something lasting, something that would help others the way Evelyn helped her. She began planning a small workshop in town, a space where anyone could come to learn sewing and design, no matter their background. She wanted it to be free, supported by donations and her own earnings. When word spread, people showed up: teenagers, single moms, even retired folks. They came with old clothes, fabrics, and hope. Maggie taught them how to stitch, design, and most importantly, believe. She often told them, "You don't need fancy tools or rich friends. You just need heart and patience." As she watched her students smile and create, she felt something deeper than pride. She felt peace. Months later, the same local newspaper that once called her a waitress turned designer ran another story. The headline read, "The waitress who wowed everyone gives back to her town." When Maggie saw it, she smiled quietly. Not because she wanted attention, but because she finally understood what her journey was really about. It wasn't about fame or fashion or even success. It was about proving that no one deserves to be sneered at for dreaming. And as the sun set over the town that once doubted her, Maggie looked up and whispered to herself, "Sneered at no more." The small workshop that Maggie started began to feel like a second home for many people. It was nothing fancy, just a converted storage room behind the diner with mismatched chairs, a few old sewing machines, and bright fabric draped along the walls. But it had warmth, laughter, and the kind of hope that couldn't be bought. Every afternoon, after finishing her orders and checking her designs for the fashion company, Maggie would walk to the workshop and open the doors for anyone who wanted to learn. It didn't matter if they had never touched a sewing machine before. She told everyone the same thing she used to tell herself: "You can start small and that's enough." People from nearby towns began to visit after hearing about her story online. Some came just to meet her. Others came to learn. There was a young man who wanted to make clothes for his mother, an elderly woman who brought her late husband's shirts to turn into something new, and a group of high school girls who dreamed of becoming designers. Maggie treated them all the same, with patience, kindness, and belief. She saw a part of her old self in each of them. One evening, while cleaning up, she found an old photo under one of the tables. It was from years ago, her in her waitress uniform holding a tray of coffee cups, smiling nervously. Someone had taken it without her noticing. She stared at it for a while. That girl had no idea what was coming. Tears filled her eyes, but not from sadness. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the pain that shaped her, for the strangers who became family, and for the people who once doubted her, because they too had been part of her story. Not long after, Maggie was invited to speak at a community event in the city. It wasn't about fashion this time, and it was about resilience. She almost said no at first. Public speaking still scared her, and she didn't think of herself as someone important enough to stand on a stage. But Evelyn convinced her to go. "People need to hear from someone real," Evelyn said. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest." So Maggie went. She stood behind the curtain, her palms sweating, heart racing. The crowd was bigger than she expected. Hundreds of people waiting to hear her story. When her name was announced, she took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The bright lights almost blinded her, but she forced herself to smile. For a few seconds, she just stood there, silent, looking at the faces in front of her. Then she began to speak. She didn't use fancy words or memorized lines. She spoke the way she always did, from her heart. She told them about the diner, about the long nights, about how people used to sneer at her dreams. She told them how one act of kindness changed everything, and how she learned that the biggest difference comes from believing in yourself even when no one else does. By the time she finished, the room was silent again, the same kind of silence she'd heard at the fashion show. Then people began to clap. Some even stood. It wasn't just applause. It was connection. Afterward, many came up to her with tears in their eyes. They thanked her for being real, for showing that success doesn't always come from money or luck. Sometimes, it comes from holding on when life keeps trying to knock you down. That night, as she rode the train back home, she looked out the window and smiled. She thought about all the years she'd spent feeling invisible. Now she finally understood that being seen wasn't about fame or attention. It was about touching people's hearts. Back in town, her workshop began to grow beyond what she expected. Donations poured in, and she was able to buy more sewing machines, better lighting, and supplies. Local businesses offered to help. Even some of the people who had once looked down on her started volunteering. One day, an envelope arrived at the diner addressed to her. It had no return name. Inside was a note that said, "I used to laugh at you when you talked about fashion. I'm sorry. You proved me wrong. Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like." She didn't know who wrote it, but she kept it in her drawer. It reminded her that even the harshest voices can change when they see the truth. Months passed, and the small workshop became a community center. It wasn't just about sewing anymore. People came to share stories, ideas, and dreams. Some brought coffee and snacks, others brought music. Maggie would often sit in the back just watching everyone laugh and create. It filled her heart with peace. One afternoon, while packing up some finished pieces, Evelyn walked in with a grin. "Guess what?" she said, waving a letter. "What now?" Maggie asked, curious. "You've been invited to showcase your designs at an international fair in Paris." Maggie froze. Paris. The word alone felt like something out of a dream. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Completely," Evelyn said, smiling. "They want you to represent sustainable fashion. It's a huge deal." For a moment, Maggie couldn't speak. She had never even been on a plane before her first show in Los Angeles. The idea of going to Paris felt unreal, but then she laughed softly. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." Preparing for the trip brought back all the nerves she thought she'd outgrown. But when she arrived in Paris, standing in front of a hall filled with designers from all over the world, she realized something. She belonged there. Her collection, from the ground up, was displayed again, alongside new pieces inspired by her students' creations. Every design had a story, a second chance stitched into every seam. When people came to her booth, she didn't just talk about fabric or design. She talked about people, about how beauty can rise from the simplest places, even a small-town diner. The audience loved it. Reporters wrote about her journey again, this time calling her the waitress who changed fashion's heart. But fame never changed Maggie. When she returned home, she went straight to the diner before anything else. Brenda was there, wiping the counter. "Back so soon?" Brenda asked, smiling. "Always," Maggie said, slipping on her apron. They laughed, and for a moment, everything felt the same. The clinking of plates, the chatter of customers, the smell of fresh coffee. But deep down, Maggie knew she was living proof that dreams don't need to start big. They just need to start. Years went by, and her story continued to inspire people across the world. She kept designing, teaching, and mentoring others. But no matter how far she traveled, she always came back to the town that once doubted her. One day, a little girl walked into the workshop holding a sketchbook. She was shy, nervous, and spoke softly, almost whispering. Maggie smiled and knelt beside her. "Would you like to learn how to bring your drawings to life?" she asked. The girl nodded, her eyes shining. As Maggie showed her how to thread the machine and press the pedal slowly, she couldn't help but remember the first time she did it herself, alone, scared, and unsure. Now she was the one guiding others, passing the light forward. When the girl finished her first stitch, she looked up proudly. "I did it!" Maggie smiled warmly. "See, I told you. You can do anything." The girl grinned, and in that small smile, Maggie saw everything she had worked for, the reason she had kept going all those years. That night, as the lights dimmed and everyone left, she stood alone in the workshop. The air was filled with the faint scent of fabric and the quiet hum of peace. She thought about her journey, from being sneered at to being celebrated, from loneliness to community, from a waitress with a hidden dream to a woman who helped others find theirs. She picked up a piece of fabric from the table and ran her fingers across it. It was rough at first, but softened with care. Just like life, she thought. As she turned off the lights and stepped outside, she looked up at the sky, full of stars. Her eyes glistened as she whispered softly, "Thank you." It wasn't clear who she was thanking, maybe the world. Maybe fate, maybe the girl she once was who refused to give up. The town was quiet, just like always. But something in the air felt lighter now, as if even the streets that once carried whispers now carried pride. People didn't sneer anymore when they talked about the waitress. They smiled, because now she was the woman who proved that even the smallest dreams can shine brighter than anyone expects. And from that day on, everyone in that town knew one thing for sure: she was sneered at no more.